Hi everyone, I'm just back from seeing Drop, which is a Blumhouse film about a woman on a terrible first date, where in fact she's in danger, but she also is the danger. At one point, a waitress comes over to speak to her and says, "Look, you seem really on edge. Do you think that you're in danger from your date? Because I can get you out of here." And she's like, "Oh no, my date's fine. That's not the problem. The problem, which she doesn't reveal to the waitress, is that a complete psychopath is about 50 feet away from her and airdropping terrifying messages onto her phone, which include the fact that he's in her house or someone associated with him is in her house, threatening her small son. You have to be. I went to see this as escapist viewing after a very long week at work, and I thought about 10 minutes in, oh, geez, this was the wrong choice for Escape. This is one of the most nerve shredding films I've seen in months. It's extremely manipulative because obviously you see a woman who's gone through, as we learn, already an abusive marriage, and then her husband appears to be dead, and her little boy is at home and she's left him with her sister for this first date that she's gone on since her husband's death. In other words, the emotional stakes could not be raised higher. And talking of higher, they also go for a date on in a restaurant that's like a kind of a viewing platform at the top of an enormous skyscraper. So it's kind of Chekhov's skyscraper. It's like, well, if you're that high up, someone is going to die hard. That is what is going to happen. So you're constantly waiting for that to take its inevitable form as well. So basically, all the all the precious glasses are right on the edge of the table right from the start of the film. Here's what I think is interesting about it. It's an example of a genre which has been growing for quite some time. In the last 10 years or so, a genre in which the source of horror lies in the domestic space in patterns of behaviour we associate with abuse. Now, I wouldn't for a second suggest horror's never tackled this before or cinema's never tackled it. Of course it has. But I just feel like if you look at things like Midsommar and you look at The Invisible Man from a few years ago, which was also Blumhouse, and a couple of other things like Barbarian, and there was one about 10 or so years ago called They Look Like People. All of these films looked at gaslighting, treatment of women by men in intimate relationships, as the inciting incident to a horror movie. In the case of Barbarian, it was a bit more complicated. One of the characters was a man who had been accused of abuse and rape. Uh, and then the question was, is he going to continue that behavior or is he the problem? That is the central question in this film because Megan Fahey turns up on her first date with dashing Brandon Sklenar, looking gorgeous in a gown, in a lovely red dress. That's Megan Fahey's looking gorgeous in a lovely red dress. Brandon Sklenar is not in a lovely red dress, but he is nonetheless a counterpoint to the toxic masculinity that runs through the film. He seems like a very sensitive guy. They talk about her abusive relationship that she's come through and survived. He talks about a difficult situation that he's been in. But that situation is about to explode over dinner because while Megan Fahey is sitting there, she starts getting these sinister messages on her phone from someone who is nearby in this precarious restaurant and clearly wants her to kill Brandon Sklenar. He wants, we presume it's a man, wants her to kill her date. And it emerges that Brandon Sklenar is a photographer who works for the local town city mayor, and we can sense political corruption perhaps as one of the issues behind all this. That's from an early stage. We're starting to get that message, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything there. But there's obviously some kind of motive towards him, something to do with his job. And she's a pawn in this game. And so is her poor son. So, in other words, what we have is an effective, if very exploitative, kind of central metaphor, which is really what you have is any old first date where you've got two people with a lot of trauma on that date. That's not that unusual, I suspect. When I say any old first date, that's not to downplay the sheer weight of trauma that Megan Fahey's character is bringing into the situation. I mean, it's horrendous. I wanted to watch the conversation between the two of them become what it almost could, which is a kind of before sunset for a cynical era. Or a hurt, traumatized, wounded era, in which actually these two people are going to meet, and what they're going to bond over is their experiences of violence and of gaslighting. And I actually wanted to watch that dialogue play out because as these two very good screen presences, both these actors talked, it really did feel as though a sort of intimacy was growing up between them. But of course, it's a Blumhouse film, so there has to be this, this literally heavy-handed drop metaphor of, well, here's evil dropping into your phone every 5 seconds. Here's the most visceral set of things that could possibly be brought into the situation. But you know what? I want to give the film a little credit for at least trying to find a visual language and a generic structure to think and talk about fear as a psychological experience, as the experience of having been victimized. That fear becomes part of your daily life, and fear becomes part of you in a way. And I mean, it is a deeply unsettling film to watch because it captures that feeling of having internalized something. The other thing I thought that was interesting about it was that I don't know when they decided to make it, but it really took me back to the immediate days post-pandemic, because one of the things that Megan Fahey does as she scans the room, and the camera moves very, very fluently around this circular restaurant space, as though you're sort of almost becoming dizzy with it, is that she's kind of looking to see which of the people in the room is it who's doing this to her. But you also feel as though she's just overwhelmed by the space. She's just overwhelmed by being around people that much. She's been hidden away with her son. And in that sense, it felt like two kinds of post-pandemic thriller as well. One is the kind that's about what it means to be back out in the world, and I think we were all having those experiences 2 or 3 years ago, where it felt like, certainly my first few social experiences after the pandemic had this unsettling paranoid quality of not being used to that much sound, not being used to that much movement anymore. But in a second sense, a post-pandemic thriller, because the idea that we communicate with each other virtually became, just like the fear this film is also about, it became an external thing that became embedded in us, part of us. We now carry with us the sense that we are available to each other in virtual space in a way that I'm not sure we entirely did before the pandemic. And that's also gone hand in hand with the growth in AI and the sense of having a companion wherever you go. The distraction in this film of the phone, well, that's a plot point. She's distracted by the phone because her son might be killed. But most of us are distracted by our phones for other more banal reasons. Nonetheless, is there not a sense in which we now have one foot in a different geography, a permanently different geography? One which tells you who's near you in virtual space. You click online and how much information about you is visible to the people around you. Which Wi-Fi network are you joining? Who is listening in? This film is about that virtual space, and it comes up with a dizzying literal space high up in a building filled with, psychopaths, to kind of capture the feeling that we might have about the other kind of space. And in that sense, I thought it worked. I mean, it's exploitative, it's a bit crass, but it works. Here's where it doesn't work, though. If there's one thing we know about all that technology, if you were some sociopath who decided to use AirDrop as a way to manipulate someone into committing murder, You just know the Wi-Fi would give out in the middle of that experiment. There is no way technology would enable you to follow this woman around this room, to listen into her conversations, etc., etc., etc. What has happened here is that traditional, and this is a really old problem with films about technology, it fulfills the role of magic. This technology is basically working like magic. This woman's tormentor is able to do things that only someone who really existed on the spiritual plane could do. And I'm sorry, but if there's one thing we know about Wi-Fi is it is not a gateway to an untrammeled bodiless experience of the ether, because it will just give out on you while you're in the middle of downloading that file. So I'm sorry, in the end, the story fails because once again, cinema does not really know how to use technology. It still uses it as if it were a plot device akin to magic. With that bugbear out of the way, I will say this is a fascinating film about fear and about gaslighting and about the extent to which the virtual world we inhabit makes both those problems worse, more intimate, more inescapable. It's crass, it's exploitative, it's a bit cheap, it's a Blumhouse movie, sorry, but I certainly found that there was plenty there to be getting on with as a viewer. So I recommend it if you're feeling strong and you're not massively triggered by all the endless horrors that it constantly brings to the surface. With that said, have a nice night.